Okay, quick thing that we're going to discuss here. I've got the numbers for position of the amount of players that are in the top 100. So quarterbacks have 11 on the list, which is strange to me because there's one quarterback for each team. Obviously, that's going to be available for this list. And you have 11 quarterbacks. The numbers just don't make sense. Okay. There's 2 guards on every team, and there's only 7 guards on this list. If I'm just a guy who knows nothing about football, but I can see how people align, I'd say, hey, Pete, you're probably wrong here.
So Jordan, I'm looking at the list, bottom to top. Jordan Love at 92. Dak at 90 feels insanely low. And I know there were the injury issues, and I'm not sure how much the injuries weigh into the sort of 2 or 3 year evaluation because Dak was going off a couple years ago. The names on I think the other thing that we sort of remember and sort of forget at times, depending on how we look at this list, without a quarterback, it doesn't matter what the rest of your team looks like. So I get that part of it. I've been a Jordan Love fan since day one. I would include him on this list. Would you have him inside the top 100?
Yeah, I would. When he's healthy, and when he's healthy in combo with Matt LaFleur, I love Matt LaFleur. I think Jordan Love can make any throw in the book, but it all comes down to health with him. But there's a number of guys who are injured on this list, so there's that. The team breakdown here, Ryan. So 2 of the top 4 teams made conference finals. And when I'm talking about team breakdown, I'm talking about the number of players from each of these teams. So you can see the Eagles have 10 players, and down the list, the Niners have 5 players. And that's been the gripe about the Niners. They've got great football players, but they're not able to get this thing done. Chiefs right there in the middle of the pack, Ravens, all the usual suspects. So 2 of the top 4 teams made conference finals. Bills and Commanders had far fewer players. The Eagles and the Lions have the most. How much does scheme have to do with it? And then Saints and the Panthers have 0. So how much do you think scheme has to do with the success of these teams? Or is it Johnny's and Joe's, or is it X's and O's?
Right. So we just talked about the Eagles. We talked a lot about the Eagles. They've crushed it in the scouting department. Excuse me. And the coaches have gotten it right. We'll see what the offense looks like this year. Now that Kellen Moore is gone, but Vic Fangio is still there. You can speak to the awesomeness that is the offensive line coach and Mr. Stoutland. Lions, again, we'll see what that looks like now that the coordinators are gone, both to the Jets and to the Bears. But Dan Campbell is still there, and they have players. And you go on down the list. And I think the further down the list you go, it speaks more. Like the Ravens, for example, only have 6. But I think they do a great job of getting the complementary players that aren't necessarily stars who can still work around Lamar Jackson. And that defense is a hair-on-fire type unit. And then to the bottom, it's the usual suspects. The Patriots have 1. The Browns have 1. The Cardinals have 1. I'm trying to find a team that's pretty good at the bottom. I mean, the Steelers
the Vikings and the Steelers, they have the lowest of the playoff teams with just 2 each. And I think it's important to weigh, we've been talking about coaches this whole show. It's a player list, and we're talking about coaches the whole show. Kevin O'Connell, Mike Tomlin, they can do more with less, but I'd argue that in Minnesota, there's more than 2 guys that belong on the list.
Yeah, and it's Justin Jefferson and then Darisaw, who was injured for much of the year, second half of the season. But the Jordan Addison's not a bad player. TJ Hawkinson, he can hold his own. And then you have Brian Flores, which could be on some level scheme related, just dialing up insane blitzes and pressuring young quarterbacks on the other side. I think to your point, the Vikings are not even a little. They're much further along than the Steelers are in terms of if you're stacking up personnel and teams you want to move forward with in 2025. Now the Dolphins with 2, that checks out. And I think I've asked you this before about the perception and the reality of whether the Dolphins are soft when the weather turns. They do have some playmakers, but they also don't seem to show up when the moment's the biggest.
Yeah, it all comes down to offensive line, I think, which is why the next topic is 19 offensive linemen on the list. There's 10 tackles, 7 guards, 2 centers. And producer Harry asks, are guards accurately represented, Kyle? Miners and Tooney, their ranking. Well, we talked about the Quinn Miners ranking. The thing that bothers me about the Joe Tooney ranking, I'll have to go look at it again, exactly where he's ranked. I think it's 50 or somewhere around there. Joe Tooney's 55. So Joe Tooney, an all-pro guard. I mean, again, we talked about how these guards aren't weighed as heavily as some of these tackles, but I'd argue that guards are more important than tackles because, that's where the quarterback's got to stand. And the thing that makes Joe Tooney a rare zebra in this stable of horses is that he can also go out to tackle and provide you top 10 level tackle play. I'm going to have Joe Thuney a little bit higher on this list. I'm sorry, producer Harry. I'm sorry, Pete Briscoe. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. What did you think? What stood out to you? I know I've talked at length about the tackle rankings there at the top. What stood out to you about the offensive lineman here?
Yeah, and the other thing, I think I was talking to our buddy Lee J. Dinswell about this, who played as a defensive lineman for a decade in the league, and he said what people, normal people like me, not you, obviously, and you can actually speak to this, don't understand is that, yeah, you can have an athletic tackle out there, but things move so much faster inside a guard that people think it's just a bunch of big fat guys in there clogging up the middle, where the reality is it's a lot more than that. There's a lot more happening. There's stunts in your face. And then you, to your point, the quarterback's closer than if you're playing right or left tackle.
What's the shortest distance between 2 points?
Straight line. I learned that.
And if you were looking to get the quarterback, where would you want to be? Would you want to be in the A gap right there, right by him? You can smell his center's butt, or do you want to be 10 yards removed at a 9 technique? No, I'll tell you where you want to be. You want to be right there in the middle, where they put J.J. Watt at times, where they put Aaron Donald at times. Yeah, it's a nightmare inside, and things do happen quickly. At tackle, they often say you die a slow death. At a guard, you die a very fast death. Okay. So
right.
Why no center love? Harry asks. Creed Humphrey holding it down. Yeah, I mean, Creed Humphrey is the epitome of what it means to be a badass center in the National Football League. And there's a lot of really good centers, particularly on there's a youth movement in the center position. Okay, we see Juergens in Philly. We see Frazier in Pittsburgh, who is, a budding star in this league. There's a number of guys. JPJ in Vegas is a good center and an Oregon Duck. So I got to talk about him. Look, center is the glue that holds things together. Just like the middle linebacker position is undervalued, their ability to make others around them better is, what makes them special. And Creed Humphrey makes the guys around him better. We talked about tackles being overvalued. I would argue, okay, so tackles overvalued, ? I typed it in. I would argue, yes, the sweet spot where most of the tackles belong is on the fringe of the top 20. But the Eagles got Pete's royalty treatment. No disrespect to Mailata and Johnson, but I love the guys that are bunched up on the rankings with Sewell and Wirfs. My goodness, I wrote Baskin Robbins. We got all the flavors. Just pick one. Okay, let's move to the defensive side of the ball. Let's talk about just 4 linebackers on the list. Is it the least valued position in the National Football League? I really believe it is, similar to running back or center.
Yeah, no, that's right. And for the longest time when I would do these mock drafts, Eagles fans would get so angry if you put a linebacker at the bottom of the first round the last 4 or 5 years. They finally did it this year, and maybe that tide is turning, given what Vic Fangio wants to do with his linebackers and what we've seen them do. And you just talked about Zach Vaughn. But I remember back in 2014, the Steelers took Ryan Shazier out of Ohio State, and that was sort of one of the first times you saw like a 6'2", 225-pound linebacker be drafted as first-round pick.
Who runs like a deer.
Ran in the 4.3s, and then you saw him play, and yeah, he's going to run around blocks, but all these guys, for the most part, run around blocks now. So I do think it's undervalued. I think, obviously, to your point, you want to build in the trenches first, because if you can pressure the quarterback with edge, interior defensive line pressure, the all-ball linebacker is less of a concern. But I think when we see guys like Jihad Campbell move in a special way, or Fred Warner historically, or what Zach Bond did last year, it makes me think maybe we're going to come back around, and sort of the same way we're coming back around a little bit on these running backs.
Well, I hate linebackers, but they do deserve respect. And you know what? Jaire Alexander, that's a guy who wants some respect at this point in his career. Really great football player. The issue has been availability for him. He's the only free agent on the top 100. So the question is, what does the pack letting him go say about him as a player? And I wrote, there's the crazy hot scale. He's way up both axes. They just got tired of him not being available. It's as simple as it is, which happens to 99.99% of players. You deal with injury. You're not on the field. The team's like, well, we're paying you X. You've only played Y. Let's figure out something to do here.
Let me ask you this about Jaire, who I think is awesome when he's healthy. if I think it's 2023 season, the final week of the season, if he just went out there as a teammate of his and he went out there and just named himself captain and stood in midfield before the coin toss in the final game of the regular season, how would that go over?
I would be so locked into the game, I wouldn't have even noticed that it happened. But when I got wind of it afterwards, I'd be like, I would probably laugh. I'd imagine that a lot of the guys, particularly the offensive linemen, find it funny, some of the stuff that he's doing. These skill guys, DBs, receivers, they're all funny, dude. They're all so funny. I would imagine Jaire's funny. He was like, I'm from there. I want to be the captain. I would have laughed. And I did laugh when I first heard it.
I didn't hate it. Like, there are worse things you could do, I was like, okay.
It's funny.
Yeah, I agree. He's going to get paid. He's going to land on a good spot. If he's healthy, he's going to be good. That's just the reality. Your point is that if you're not healthy, it doesn't matter who you are. You can't play. But if you're healthy and knowing what he's done historically, he's not an old player. I think you put up with the antics, which seem harmless, and then you roll them out there and get interceptions.
You know what? I played with a guy named Brandon Marshall, and that was when I was a rookie. I came into the locker room, and it was Cutler and Marshall and Martellus Bennett, and Matt Forte, Alshon Jeffrey. We had a lot of skill in that building. And one thing I found out is that if you were to showcase that skill every single day, you could also let some red flags pop out every once in a while. And the coaches are just like, hey, that's just the way that it is. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying Brandon Marshall was ever a mean guy or a bad guy, but I would just, sometimes it would be an inside run period and Brandon Marshall would come into the huddle and demand the football. And Jay would say, Brandon, get the out of my huddle. This is the running period. We are running the ball. All of your receivers are on the other field on the jugs machine. When you get to a certain age and you can't take a 2-yard hitch and bring it 15 yards, then the coaches start to be like, hey,
right,
we need to try out the next guy. So for Jaire, that's probably where we're at.